Phu Tien immersed herself in nature, continuing the simple life she'd long grown accustomed to. The green forest remained her daily refuge, a place where babbling streams trickled over rocky crevices, where dense canopies stretched across the sky, offering a sense of peace amid the vast wilderness. With a neatly tied headscarf and a weathered shirt faded by time, she trudged along familiar trails, her eyes keenly searching for tiny snails hidden beneath layers of fallen leaves and moss. On mornings like this, as the sun just began to rise, Tu Tien left her modest home with a plain bamboo basket and a small knife in hand. Under the thick undergrowth, she carefully hunted for snails clinging to tree trunks or nestled in the damp soil. It wasn't easy work. Patience and precision were key to gathering enough to sell at the market. But for her, it was a way of life. Though laborious, it brought her joy and a sense of freedom. As the sun climbed higher, its rays filtered through the leaves, casting shimmering patches of light on the ground. Tu Tien's basket gradually filled with the small snails that served as her main source of income. The money from selling them wasn't much, but it was enough to sustain her modest existence. She didn't crave luxury or material wealth, just the chance to blend into nature each day. Basking in the tranquility of the mountains was more than enough. Once she'd gathered enough, she carefully hoisted her basket of snails and made her way to the market. It was a small roadside affair where rural folks gathered to trade the forest's bounty. Tu Tien picked a quiet corner, spread out a cloth, and neatly arranged the plump snails she'd collected. She waited for her regular customers to stop by. She hadn't been sitting long when two men approached and asked, "How much for a kilo of these snails?" Tu Tien replied promptly, 20,000 dong per kilo. Some bought a handful to cook in soup, while others purchased more to resell in the city. Though it didn't make her rich, Tien was content with her life, a life free of hustle and competition, defined by peace and independence. She knew this existence wasn't easy, but she never felt pessimistic. Each day was another chance to live alongside nature, breathing crisp air, listening to birdsong and feeling the sun's warmth. To her, that was true happiness. After a morning of hard work, Tu Tien finally sold off her small basket of snails. The money she earned wasn't much, but it was enough to get her through a few more days. With a sigh of relief, she packed up her worn bamboo basket and left the market. On her way back, Tu Tien walked slowly, savoring the quiet calm after a day of labor. But as she neared the trail to her cave, she froze. Up ahead, a familiar figure came into view. It was Tien, her ex-husband. He was sitting at a roadside tea stall, his arm draped around a strange woman. She was dressed in loud, flashy clothes, her lips painted a bold red, exuding a flirtatious air. Tu Tien stopped in her tracks, her chest tightening. He'd already moved on to someone new, yet here he was, showing up in front of her. For what? Tien caught sight of her too. His eyes flickered with surprise before hardening into a cold stare. Letting go of the woman, he strode toward Tu Tien, his voice low and threatening. "Listen up. From now on, you're not allowed to tell anyone you're my ex-wife. If you do, don't blame me for what happens next." Tien clenched her fists. She wanted to laugh, but the sound wouldn't come. "I never had any intention of mentioning you, and if you're so ashamed of having a wife like me, then stop showing your face around here." Tien glared, his hand twitching as if he might lash out, but he just waved her off and turned away. The woman with him sized Tu Tien up with a sneer, then linked arms with Tien, and the two walked off together. Tu Tien stood rooted to the spot. She'd thought she was over him, so why did her heart still ache? It wasn't love. It was the sting of his blatant contempt. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself and kept walking. Elsewhere, Tuan and his crew were at a large stream. He stood with his assistant, Hoai, reviewing blueprints and discussing plans with the engineers. "This bridge is old and rotting. If we don't rebuild it soon, it'll be dangerous come the rainy season," Tuan said. A worker nodded, adding, "Yes, sir. Lately the water's been rising and a few kids nearly fell in." Tuan mulled it over for a moment, then said decisively, "Then let's start the survey right away. I want this project moving as fast as possible." He turned to Hoai. "Prepare the financial plan and get it back to me by tomorrow." Hoai nodded, though her eyes lingered on Tuan, filled with quiet contemplation. Meanwhile, earlier that day, CEO Tuan had stopped by Tu Tien's home to check on her, but she wasn't there. After asking around, he learned from the locals that she was selling at the market. Deciding to wait for her return, he settled inside her cave. As the afternoon waned, the sun dipped low, bathing the mountains in a warm orange glow. Tu Tien trudged back to her cave after a long, exhausting day. She'd sold all her snails, but her encounter with Tien left her heart heavy. Upon reaching her home, she froze in surprise. There was Tuan sitting inside. His white shirt was dusted with the grime of a day's work, and he held a small bag, his gaze steady and thoughtful as it met hers. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice calm, but firm enough to snap her out of her thoughts. Tu Tien blinked, caught off guard. She never imagined someone like Tuan would come all the way here to find her. Why are you here?" she asked, her tone tinged with wariness. Tuan stepped closer, setting the bag aside before sitting on a nearby rock. "I can see life here isn't easy for you. Do you need anything?" Tu Tien shook her head. She was used to this life, to managing on her own, and she didn't want anyone's pity. "I'm fine, I don't need anything." Tuan fell silent for a moment, then pulled out a stack of cash and placed it in front of her. "Take it. It's not charity, just a little help." Tu Tien stiffened. She stared at the money, a swirl of emotions rising within her. "I can't take it," she said firmly. Tuan raised an eyebrow, his expression as composed as ever. "It's not just for you. I do this for anyone. Think of it as me doing a good deed." His words stung faintly. So, she was just another name on a list of people he'd helped. She looked at him, then gently pushed the money back toward him. "I really can't accept it. I can take care of myself." Tuan didn't press further. Instead, he gave a rare, faint smile. Small but meaningful. "Fair enough, but if you ever run into trouble, let me know." With that, he stood, adjusting the hard hat on his head. Time was running short. He had work to get back to. Before leaving, he glanced at her once more, his eyes seeming to hold something unspoken, though no words came. As Tuan disappeared down the winding trail, Tu Tien was left alone by her small fire. She watched him go, then sighed, turning back to stoke the flames. She began roasting some fish she'd caught earlier. The smell of grilling fish filled the air, but her mind remained quietly unsettled. Early in the morning, Tu Tien left her cave, an old bamboo basket slung over her shoulder. She carried on with her daily routine, quiet, diligent, always working to survive. Today, she decided to head into the forest to pick bananas. The lush green banana trees shaded a corner of the sky, their ripe golden bunches peeking out in the early sunlight. She carefully cut each bunch, arranging them neatly in her basket. Though life was harsh, she never let it break her. Her calloused hands moved swiftly, slicing the ripe clusters and stacking them with care. The work was grueling, but it was her only livelihood, sustaining her simple existence in the mountains. With a heavy basket of bananas weighing on her shoulder, Tu Tien made her way down the narrow path to the market. The sun blazed hotter than usual today, sweat beading on her forehead, but she pressed on patiently. Elsewhere in the market, CEO Tuan appeared. Dressed in his usual white shirt, he carried the same calm demeanor. He stepped into a nearby general store, glancing around to see what he might need. After a moment of thought, he settled on buying some milk cartons. He asked the shopkeeper, "How much for a pack of milk?" The owner replied cheerfully, 50,000 dong per pack. Tuan quickly grabbed 3 packs, paid, chatted briefly with the shopkeeper, then headed back to his car. At the small market, Tu Tien claimed her familiar spot, spreading out an old cloth and neatly arranging the banana bunches. She sat down, her eyes tracking the flow of people passing by, hoping someone would stop to buy so she could make enough for the day. But today didn't seem to be her lucky day. People came and went, yet no one paused. The entire morning passed without a single sale. Tien sat quietly in her corner, her gaze drifting over the bustling crowd, nibbling on her food while telling herself that with just a little more effort, luck would eventually turn her way. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. She hadn't eaten since morning, but without selling any bananas, she couldn't afford to buy anything. She pressed her lips together, glancing at the stall next door, a small general store with neatly displayed bread and sticky rice packets. After a moment's hesitation, she dug into her pocket for the little money she had and bought a small loaf of bread. Though she had to be frugal, she knew she needed food to keep going. Holding the bread, she sat back down, taking small bites. her eyes still fixed on the untouched bunches of bananas in front of her. Today, Tuan had an important plan: distributing gifts to underprivileged children in a remote mountain village. As he drove, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror and caught sight of Tien sitting by the roadside, selling bananas with a somber look. A thought sparked in his mind. He pulled over, stepped out of the car, and walked straight toward her. "Are you busy today?" Tuan asked, his voice warm and steady. Tu Tien looked up, slightly taken aback by his question. Not really." Tuan nodded, his gaze resolute. "Then come with me. I'm heading to a village to give out gifts to poor kids. If you're free, join us." Tu Tien hesitated. She'd never been part of something like this before, but seeing the sincerity in Tuan's eyes, she found it hard to say no. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll go." Tuan smiled and opened the car door for her. At that moment, Huang, his assistant, who was already seated inside, turned to look at Tu Tien with a flash of irritation, though she quickly masked it with a polite smile. The car sped along the winding trail, cutting through lush green fields toward the impoverished village. When they arrived, a group of scruffy children with bright, clear eyes rushed out, crowding around the vehicle. They cheered excitedly as they spotted the large gift bags Tuan and his team had brought. Tu Tien stood watching the scene, a strange emotion swelling in her chest. It had been a long time since she'd last felt such pure, carefree joy. She quickly joined Tuan and the workers in handing out the gifts. Huang, meanwhile, lingered off to the side, observing with a barely concealed displeasure. A little girl tugged at Tu Tien's hand, her sparkling eyes wide with curiosity. "Do you come here a lot, big sister?" Tu Tien paused, then shook her head gently. "No, this is my first time." The girl beamed, clutching the doll Tu Tien had just given her, then darted off to show it to her friends. Tuan stood nearby, quietly watching her. He noticed that around the children, Tu Tien's smile softened, shedding the usual veil of melancholy. As the gift-giving wrapped up, Tuan turned to her, his voice low. "How do you feel?" Tu Tien smiled, her first real smile in ages, and felt a lightness settle in her heart. "I didn't think something so small could bring so much happiness." Tuan nodded. "Sometimes helping others is a way to heal yourself too." Tu Tien looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. Maybe he was right.
Cả gia đình chồng đón tiếp nồng hậu, trong khi cô, người đã hy sinh cả thanh xuân vì mái nhà này, chỉ là một cái bóng nhạt nhòa, thật sự quá nỗi đau lòng. Mẹ chồng cô không ngần ngại buông những lời cay nghiệt như thể chỉ chờ cơ hội này để trút hết khinh thường lên đầu cô. Cái nhà này cần có cháu đích tôn, chứ không phải cần một người đàn bà vô dụng. Từng lời nói chữ dắt dao cứ sâu vào trái tim tự Tiên. Đôi mắt cô đỏ hoe, bàn tay nắm chặt bảo và áo cũ. Cô kìm nén để không bật khóc trước mặt những kẻ chẳng chút thương xót cô. Chiến, người từng đỏ tay gối với cô, người từng hứa hẹn bao điều, giờ đây lại lạnh lùng đứng nhìn không một chút do dự. Cô đã không còn gì trong ánh mắt anh ta. Nỗi đau không còn dừng lại ở những lời miệt thị khi mẹ chồng lớn tiếng đuổi cô ra khỏi nhà. Tự Tiên gần như quỵ xuống, cô không biết mình đã làm gì sai ngoài việc sinh ra một trong